The following is comprised of personal research, not personal experience. I am bound by multiple NDAs that prevent me from speaking on films I've been a part of and studios I have worked with. All opinions presented reflect my own and no company under which I am or have been employed. All material presented is material that is already open to the public. Please feel free to explore my sources through the bibliography in the info section.
There are many forces that shape a film while it's in the process of being made. A team of screenwriters, some credited, some not, rewrite draft after draft of a given screenplay. The result is reworked by the director, who may be under pressure from the studio to make certain changes, or who has the clout to make executive creative decisions. Very rare. The written characters are reinterpreted by the actors playing them. Dialogue and interactions can change on a whim, depending on what they're feeling at the moment and how much control they have. The director of photography can alter the entire mood of a scene just by changing the camera angle or reworking the lighting. An army of visual effects workers go through the film on a shot-by-shot basis, each with their own personal sensibilities, which are mostly dampened by their VFX supervisors and leads keeping them in check with the vision. The editor has their own voice, and though often caught in the middle of a tug-of-war between the director and the suits, can set the entire feel and pace of a movie. A snip here and a snip there in the editing bay can be all the difference between horror and comedy. The same potential emotional shifting of a film is a power also held by audio engineers, sound designers, and composers working on the project. Test audiences see unfinished cuts of the film, and their feedback can, and often does, force reshoots, rewrites, and re-edits during the course of this entire process. All this to say, a big budget release is more than likely to come out feeling homogenized, average, and indistinct, the result of being pushed and pulled by hundreds of influences through the course of its creation. Anything special, challenging, or unique about the film has been eroded smooth, like a boulder in a river. Yet this is entirely by design. The movie is a product, and that product will make more money if more people buy it. It has to be funny, and just inoffensive enough for children, sleek and edgy enough for teens, savvy enough for adults, while being respectful and grounded enough for seniors. When done well, this careful balance makes a thoroughly enjoyable, high-quality product that the whole family can really get into. When done poorly, it still usually makes money due to brand recognition or by having a pre-existing fan base. This is the value of homogenization, the, if you will, shotgun approach to filmmaking. The wider the spread, the lower the risk. Now that studios are making fewer and more expensive films, there is much more risk riding on each project. Hollywood mitigates that risk in two ways: safer subjects and more testing. First, it relies on sequels and adaptations that it knows have a built-in audience, not only at home, but also abroad, where explosions translate easier than wit. The formula works, too. 13 of the 14 biggest movies in 2013 were adaptations and sequels. There's so much that can be said about this process and its impact, but these points may have to be other videos. Instead, I want to focus on the shadowy portion of the filmmaking process that is both useful and potentially crippling. You've seen the title of the video, so you already know. Let's talk about test audiences. Executives want to have the backing of something that seems quantifiable and scientific in a field that is basically neither of those things, says Andrew Hinz, senior editor of Variety. Audience testing is the movie studio's way of hedging their bets. Although it's been around for a long time, it's never been a completely reliable process. Tester screenings act as a dry run for studios to check that their film presses all the right buttons, or not. The test demographic is shown a draft of the movie, and distributors then judge whether to make changes. After viewing a rough edit of the film, preview audiences are asked to complete a questionnaire or provide feedback in some form. Given today's increasingly interactive industry, how easy is it to take part in a test screening? The answer seems to be a matter of luck. The process of selection is managed by the National Research Group, the secretive market research company that operates on both sides of the Atlantic. It divides the market into 4 basic groups, known as quadrants: males under 25, males over 25, females under 25, and females over 25. In some cases, the respondents are also divided by race. From its survey results, NRG projects how well upcoming movies will do against each other in each quadrant, should they open on the same weekend. Now don't get me wrong, this feedback can be a fantastic tool for a director to further hone and refine their creative vision. Unfortunately, the results of test screenings are often used as ammunition by the studio to force changes into the film in order to make it a better product. This might result in much needed changes occurring, but sometimes the audience simply doesn't know what it wants, or is comprised of people with terrible taste. Here are some famous examples of test audiences negatively compromising some well-known films. Test audiences reacted very negatively to Alien 3, resulting in the studio forcing a young David Fincher to reshoot large portions. The resulting film was recut behind Fincher's back and is largely considered to be a mess. To this day, the original edit is lost to time. There is an edit based on descriptions of the original movie, but that too had to compromise due to lost footage. Pretty Woman was meant to be a dark drama that combines romance and realism. The original film ended with our two protagonists separating, their lives just too different. A subplot that revealed how Julia Roberts' character was addicted to hard drugs was also cut. The reshot and re-edited film had a completely different tone, in the focus of what the original intention was, simply because test audiences preferred light romantic comedy over drama, was lost. Test audiences found the song Part of Your World in The Little Mermaid to be boring, and the studio pushed to have it cut. Fortunately, the directors managed to convince Disney to let them keep it in. Similarly, in 1939, test audiences for The Wizard of Oz felt that the now classic scene in which Judy Garland sings Somewhere Over the Rainbow slowed down the action. Somehow, the songwriters prevailed and the song stayed in. Blade Runner features what is probably the most notorious studio-ruined ending of all time. The new happy ending shoved onto the end after some executive meddling is famous for showing the only shot of blue sky in the whole film, which sticks out because the scene used wasn't even filmed for Blade Runner, but was a leftover shot from The Shining. The source of much of the tension and drama in the film, the fact that replicants come with termination dates, is hand-waved away by a voiceover explaining that the replicant Rachel is special and doesn't have one. The fact that Rachel and Deckard barely seem to stand each other is swept aside by inappropriately happy music and loving glances. This released version was panned by critics and audiences, and Blade Runner was set to be lost to time as a mediocre sci-fi flick, until the director's cut was released and the cinematic masterpiece that was the original film finally saw the light of day. It's easy to find stories of movies that were entirely compromised by test audience feedback, but getting critique can also make for better art. Some major changes required based on test feedback has actually made some movies stronger as a result. In my research, I found that most directors felt studios forced changes suggested by test audiences far too often, but there are other filmmakers who feel audience research can actually provide helpful feedback. For example, director Ron Howard, responsible for hits like Apollo 13, says, "What I would hate to do is put a movie out there, find out that the audience is confused about something or upset about something that you could have fixed and go, I had no idea they'd respond that way," says Howard. Some radical examples include, audiences found the original ending to 28 Days Later to be too downbeat, so they went out and shot a more positive ending that you can see in the film today. Similarly, E.T. ended with the alien dying at the end, but audience reactions forced reshoots. Can you imagine the ruined childhoods that one would have caused? It would have been almost as bad as the Atari game. Scott Pilgrim's original ending had the lead character ending up with knives instead of Ramona. Low audience test scores led them to reshoot the end of the movie so that Scott and Ramona ended up together. And sometimes, though rarely, audiences will even side with the director, such as when Harvey Weinstein wanted to lobotomize Snowpiercer and turn it into an edited-down, bare-bones action movie with no character arcs. Yet, when Weinstein screened the original Korean version of Snowpiercer, and a version that Weinstein's editors had cut for the US release, the director's version tested much higher, and Weinstein eventually put the original cut to the great box office and video-on-demand success. We can thank these test audiences for telling Weinstein to keep his hands off the film. Christmas Vacation nearly lost one of its best gags because executives worried about pet abuse. The scene in question is when the cat chews through the electric wires of the Christmas lights and gets electrocuted. Executives were worried that killing the cat in such a traumatic way was crossing the line of decency. Producer Matty Simmons fought with executives to keep the scene, and his efforts were validated when the first test screening scored it as the funniest scene in the film. It's evident that there's no black and white, good or evil answer to the question of test screenings and audiences. Director Ron Howard continues, "It's much easier to embrace the whole testing process when you know that you ultimately control the final cut on your movies," says Howard. "But it's frightening if you're in a position where you're going to show the movie at a preview and someone else is going to take the results of that preview and recut the film based on that, maybe consulting you or maybe not. Now that's terrifying. Look, I'm not against seeing a movie with an audience," director John Waters said. "I'm against the questionnaire cards. Suddenly these rich studio heads listen to some schmo in a shopping mall? They sure don't in anything else. They wouldn't be caught dead in the shopping mall with these people." Roger Ebert, the late reviewer for the Chicago Sun-Times, has written that test screenings by filmmakers are valid to get an idea of audience response to a rough cut. But too often, however, studio executives use preview screenings as a weapon to enforce their views on directors, and countless movies have had stupid happy endings tacked on after such screenings. Director Joel Schumacher says he owes his career to movie audiences, but fears their growing clout in the filmmaking process. "I'm firmly convinced today that if they made Gone with the Wind, they would shoot 2 endings and test them. And I'm positive that a lot of people in the audience would want Rhett to go back to Scarlet, and I'm afraid that's the ending we would have on the movie." The problem with Hollywood's blockbusters in general is that they are just fine. They're average, but they're average on purpose. They are the product of Hollywood's exquisitely designed factory of averageness, which has evolved as the industry has transitioned from a monopoly to a competitive industry that can no longer afford to consistently value art over commerce. Hollywood needs to know what its fragile audience wants, and when asked, we tell them, make something like the last average thing I saw. Test screenings and preview audience feedback are an incredibly valuable tool, but like any useful filmmaking device, the industry is more than happy to abuse it if it believes it'll lead to greater profits in the long run. This exhaustive process of smoothing and refurbishing makes many bad movies better, but studios are so worried about what audiences think and are so skilled at soliciting their feedback that they ensure the next blockbuster always reminds audiences of the last blockbuster. The bad stuff gets less bad, and the brave stuff gets less brave. Until the general populace starts flocking to lower budget films, original screenplays, or daring concepts, unlikely, this glut of lowest common denominator storytelling for the sake of good business will only continue and expand. Call me a pessimist, but I don't see anything changing anytime soon. The numbers back it up. The film industry churns out high-quality, crowd-pleasing products. People love it. There's nothing wrong with that, really. For those of us feeling marginalized, those of us more interested in artistry than franchise, we'll always have our film festivals and internet forums. This has been Cinema Cemetery, digging 6 feet deeper into film and culture. Thanks for watching.